Hello, and welcome to Mangasplaining. Listen to me. It's the occasional interview version of the Mangasplaining podcast where we talk to some of the movers and shakers in the world of manga to supplement our regular reading list. This week, Deb and myself, Christopher Woodrow Butcher, interview two esteemed gentlemen and lifers in the manga industry, Patrick Macias and Matt Alt. They're the dynamic duo behind Pure Tokyoscope, a very cool podcast. Chip, if you're listening, think of it like a crossover issue. Just a few notes before we jump in. Deb has some audio issues for the first few minutes, but fear not, those do disappear, although the melodic Hawaiian bird song continues throughout the episode. Also, I totally got the start time wrong, due to this episode being recorded in Hawaii, Tokyo, and Taiwan, and during daylight savings time. What an international episode! So I jump in and join the interview after the break, about 34 minutes in. Finally, we want to offer our sincere thanks to Patrick and Matt for joining us on Mangasplaining, and we'd invite you to go check out the Pure Tokyoscope podcast on whatever you're using to listen to me right now, but maybe wait until after this episode's over. Now, here's Deb with the real start of the interview.
Hello, and welcome to Pure Mangasplaining's Tokyoscope.
Nice. Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
The show where two podcasts, ostensibly about similar things, collide into each other. We are here today with our friends, Matt Alt and Patrick Macias. Please introduce yourselves, my friends.
By the way, I prefer merge or combine, like Voltron. It's like we're forming the head.
Is that the word you're looking for?
What's the word I'm looking for?
Gattai?
Gattai. Well, in Japanese, that'd be the word. I didn't want to drop any incredible, science on people just yet. So anyway, I'm Matt Alt. I'm the author of Pure Invention, How Japan Made the Modern World, and it really did. And also the co-host of the Pure Tokyoscope podcast. You should check both of these things out if you haven't.
And me. I'm Patrick Macias. I'm the editor-in-chief of Otaku USA magazine and the author of several books on Japanese pop culture. And lately, we've been doing the Pure Tokyoscope podcast with Mr. Matt Alt. Now I'm here.
And now we're here with you, Deb. Thanks for having us. You invited us virtually to glorious Hawaii. How nice.
Yeah, that's why we're getting this. The sounds of amazing Po'a Valley, which includes a wet vac across the river from me, some chickens, and the occasional
This is like
pigeon.
a tough, gritty reboot of the Brady Bunch Goes to Hawaii.
Exactly. And I hope you're sitting with a huge glass of Hawaiian punch. Well, it's not. Hawaiian punch is red. You can't fool me.
It's tea. But it's in a Hawaii Starbucks mug, so does that count?
It does. That counts. That counts. So, Deb, why have you had us here? Why have you conjured us out of the ether to your podcast today? That's the burning question I'm sure all the listeners have.
Yeah.
Well, the obvious marketing reason is I think all of our listeners, Mangasplaining, should listen to Pure Tokyoscope. Because I think if you love Mangasplaining, you'll love this podcast. How would you guys describe your podcast? What's your elevator pitch?
Patrick?
Rambling, disjointed, stream of consciousness, filled with a bunch of old Shakey's commercials from 1978, typically.
I was going to say we fit the profile, the heretofore unfilled need for middle-aged otaku podcasts, straight out of Tokyo, news you can use, and other fun topics from the streets, the burning streets of rage of Tokyo, Japan.
Because you guys are both living in Tokyo, right?
Yeah. I've been here for this actually, March will mark my 20th year here. Patrick's been here a long time, but not quite as long.
Yeah, I mean, I've been stuck in my room for the last 3 years because of this global health pandemic, but I moved here in 2018. So
is that the year we make contact? No, I believe that was 2010.
So this is the year the year we made coupons. I don't know.
So, yes, we're here. We're here and you
can't stop us. We're not going back anytime soon.
And we're ready and raring to talk about manga. We want to splain some manga. Or is it your job to splain the manga to us? I don't know. You
Story time.
Yeah.
I think you guys are actually better equipped for this because you guys have been working in this field for quite some time. I'm just an interested fan much longer than I've ever been a quote unquote professional. Like you guys have, Matt, I know you've translated many interesting manga title, many challenging manga titles.
Sure. Yeah, actually, on a serious note, my wife Hiroko Yoda and I have been running a localization company in Tokyo for the last 20 years and a couple years before that in the States. And while we mainly focused on video games for a very long time, we over the years have done some fun manga. One of the earliest ones we did was for CMX. It was called The Young Magician. Then we did one called Togari. These are like the minor ones. And then they started to get more interesting. For Viz, we did the entire run of Doro Hedoro.
Wow.
Hiroko and I. And then most famously in Japan anyway, we did the entire run of Doraemon, which is such a hugely popular manga series here in Japan. It's almost like beyond manga. It's like culture.
Wait, so you're the guy who removed all the lolicon from Doraemon?
I'm the guy.
I was start a thread on Twitter accusing you personally.
I was the guy, to do it because I'll just run through the Doko Demo door, or the Anywhere door to another place. And that was fun, but unfortunately, it's only available on Amazon in North America as a Kindle ebook. It isn't actually printed up because I guess perhaps printing 15,000 pages, which we had to do over the course of a year, was a little too much for most publishers to do. So yeah, we've done that. And Patrick's done a ton of stuff in this sphere, not translation-wise, but more like cultural critic and like writer-wise, right?
Editing, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I started working at Viz in like 1997. So we were kind of like bathing in manga, making it and reading it and bugging other publishers for freebies and stuff like that. And then, yeah, gradually moved into just being an editor in chief for Otaku USA and writing a bunch of books and just kind of trying to keep up with like the weird subculture stuff in Japan and where all that was going.
You've written a couple of subculture books, right? And you have one coming out pretty soon?
Yeah, I think, gosh, it sounds like there's going to be 3 books coming out
Wow.
at the end of the year. Yeah, some of them have been announced, some of them haven't. So, but I know our mutual friend Samuel Satin is a co-author of at least 2 of them. So I kind of have lost track of which ones I can talk about. Which ones?
Well, my favorite one is from quite some time ago. It's Tokyoscope, which gives our podcast half its name. And it was like, now in the internet era, the inner tubes where you can like look anything up. It's cool. But like back when that book came out around, what was it, 99, 2000?
2001, I think.
Yeah, it was a space odyssey, I believe, and it was like that book is. I mean, I should let you talk about it, but it's just, to me as an outsider, it was like this, guidebook to all of the crazy Japanese cinema that didn't really make it on the TV so much when you were a kid. A lot of really amazing directors in there, a lot of genres, and I remember like buying copies of that book and just giving it to friends so that we could like go to Video Search of Miami or like whatever it was, wherever we got our bootleg tapes back then.
Yeah, I mean, I used to just spend like every waking moment I possibly could at Japantown in San Francisco and just like combing the racks at Books Kinikuniya. And then they had People Video was the rental store there, and they just had like a wall of like exploitation and like Yakuza movies and stuff like that.
Right.
So I was just going into
Wow.
the deep end, and I still do. But I mean, even though it's kind of hard to get your video store kicks here in Japan, despite what they tell you, physical media here is dying pretty fast. But yeah, that's kind of where I got my education in this stuff.
You two were really lucky. I mean, Deb, you grew up in Hawaii, right?
Yep, yeah.
Yeah, Patrick, you're in California.
We're marinated in it.
Mary, exactly. I can hear that. I can see the birds like, tweeting behind you and everything. The palm trees.
The
But,
bluebird
like,
of happiness.
DC, I grew up in Maryland in the DC suburbs, and it was really tough to find Japanese content that wasn't stuff that was just being broadcast on TV. So I am envious of you guys.
I have to ask you, it's like, I think because we're all kind of old school, like, I guess fans, right? We got into this before you kids could get this stuff the same day as Japan.
Even before Kim Kardashian. That's how old school.
Or Gwen Stefani.
Pre-Pokemon.
Pre-Pokemon.
There's
yeah.
that photo of her like reading Naruto, like off the rack
wow.
or something like that. And that was just like,
What?
And that's what did it for me.
If you live too long, you see horrible things. I think that's.
I was going to say that's what got me starting to read Naruto. I mean, if a tastemaker like her reads it, why am I not reading it?
Good enough for Kim Kardashian. It's good enough for me.
Yeah. Anyway, we interrupted. You were saying?
No, I was just wondering because I know what my gateway drug was into this.
What was your gateway drug?
Lifelong
Marijuana?
expensive thing. No, that's boring in Hawaii. You know that.
No, so what was your gateway into Japanese otaku, pop culture?
One was Princess Knight, the anime.
Oh, okay. Wow.
2, we had several Japanese movie theaters here in Hawaii.
Right.
And so I saw it at the Toyo Theater in Hawaii.
That's like proto shoujo manga anime.
Yeah, and they showed it on TV too, the TV show.
Wow.
Like my sister, she's 5 years older than me, so she can still sing the theme song.
Was it subtitled or dubbed? I may ask.
subtitled.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So this is like a Hawaii only thing. I know that was dubbed, but I don't think it was widely broadcast in the, what do you call it? The mainland?
Yeah, we don't know why. But Speed Racer was.
Yeah. Patrick, do you know?
No, I mean, yeah, there's a ton of Japanese TV, anime, and tokusatsu shows that were only shown in Hawaii. Like Kikaida is like a really famous one that's like huge in Hawaii that like we never really got on the mainland. So
Really?
yeah.
It's so depressing. I always run into Hawaiians and they're like they're so Kikaida being an early tokusatsu hero, guitar playing, half cyborg. Actually, he's all cyborg. He's all robot.
Jinzo Ningen.
He's a Jinzo. He's an android, half blue, half red. Really awesome.
I can still sing the song.
Oh wow! Yeah, so like Hawaiians got all that stuff. The Kikaida, like a lot of kaiju stuff, a lot of tokusatsu stuff. We didn't.
There's pictures of Kikaida in costume, like visiting Hawaii, like shaking hands with like the governor and stuff. Like it's really amazing. Like there was like a mania. I think Kamen Rider. I think V3 also showed that.
Kamen Rider.
Wow.
Yeah, there were a bunch of shows.
I just saw a photo of like Shotaro Ishinomori coming to Hawaii,
wow.
which I did not know about. But I only found out that Shotaro Ishinomori created all the shows that I really loved in Hawaii very recently. Like we had Robocon.
Yeah.
We had
Kamen
Rider.
Wow.
Yeah,
he did Go Ranger.
Ninja. Yeah.
Go Ranger.
We had Inazuman.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
So
it must have been real tough, convincing him to come to Hawaii for a vacation. That must have been it must have been actually. It's closer to Japan too. It's only, what is that, an 8-hour flight? 6?
I think so. Yeah.
There's some
Not that
legendary
bad.
story I heard about like all the top anime manga creators like got on a plane and flew to Hawaii in like May 1977 to see Star Wars because it didn't
What?
open in Japan until 78.
Yes.
The buzz was so big they had to go see it. Then they came back and they invented cooler stuff like Message from Space.
Yes, exactly.
Oh my God. Was I in line with like some Japanese manga legends at the Cinerama Theater?
Yeah.
Because I saw it 7 times.
Oh, wow.
That's how big of a nerd I was.
Well, it's the Hawaii-Japan connection is really strong. I know, like Bullmark, which is this legendary producer of Japanese toys, die-cast toys, but mainly vinyl kaiju toys. They actually, I know, produced like color variations specifically for the Hawaiian market, and those are actually quite valuable right now. So start hunting, go through your neighbors' basements, closets. You might find some kaiju vinyls in there that are, you can use to pay for your flight back.
I have a couple of those, but they're pretty well loved, so they're not worth anything.
I love those well-loved kaiju toys.
They belong in a museum.
Oh, stop it.
Okay, so wait. We keep cutting it. So Princess Knight, or was Princess Knight basically it?
Princess Knight, Kikaida, and Candy.
Oh, man.
That's a trifecta.
Candy. I know that that was broadcast, or it wasn't broadcast. I think, was it Patrick? Is it FHE? Who brought it out? Is that like Jim Terry?
There's one volume of Family Home Entertainment. There's an English dub of just like a couple episodes on one VHS tape
with a totally different theme song. Like the Japanese one has that harpsichord intro. That's like, I know, it's just very kind of girly manga, like your kind of classic. Girl anime theme, and the American one is like this. It's like this soft rock thing.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's like candy. It's really it's on YouTube. It's I've never actually seen the show. The intro just would come up like FHE, Family Home Entertainment, was this company, and this is kind of leading into like where my drugs were.
Yeah.
At video stores in Maryland, you would occasionally find these like just one-off videotapes of anime, like Dangard Ace or Starvengers, which is known as Getorobo G in Japan.
Oh, wow!
I would only rent the robot ones, and it was kind of really depressing in a sense. It was cool you get these shows, but there's only 2 episodes in each tape. We never Volume 2. I never found any of my video stores, but they had these long previews for other series that the same company had done. Candy was one of them. Captain Future was another. Captain Harlock. And it was really tough. I would just, I was like 5 at the time. I would just watch the first 2 episodes of Dangard Ace over and over and over again, which is really depressing because if you know Dangard Ace, the robot doesn't actually appear until episode 3. So the whole point of Dangard Ace was it was this anime show. Matsumoto Leiji designed the robots and he hated designing robots. So the show turned into this it was like he focused on how much training you had to do to get into the robot first. And so
wow.
it was just nonstop. Come on, you got to practice docking. Come on. Like over and over again, the spaceship's like docking and like failing to dock. And like, I mean, it makes sense. Like, nobody's like a born super robot pilot. You have to train to become a super robot pilot. That's how I became one anyway.
It's very much a get in the robot kind of
Exactly.
Very much.
Shinji just got in the robot and he could do it. But like, apparently.
I remember that docking scene. I had that tape too growing up. And I just remember there's like a 20 minutes of just, he's having nightmares about docking. He's trying to dock.
Yes.
He's trying to begin. Like
I still have PTSD. I still do. But no, it's like, so I'm happy I had access to that because otherwise I wouldn't have had access to anything. But compared to like, I don't know, French people, Italian people, Spanish people, Hawaiian people, like who had all of this stuff. God, I'm so jealous.
It was like the air we breathed. Like we just thought everybody had it, like it like snow was completely something I couldn't fathom, right? So like the thought that you could go anywhere in the world and there wouldn't be this much Japanese content never occurred to me at that age.
I was like, so frustrated that was what drove me to really start learning Japanese and drove me to really want to go to Japan. Because I was like, what the hell? Why do these people have this stuff that's so much cooler than my own people's stuff? Like literally, like even at age like 10, I was thinking that. Wow. I was like, man, because it was just so obvious that the Japanese approached their art, of making children's entertainment with much more, I don't know. They were much more serious about it, They approached it with this craftsmanship that it's not that Americans didn't have craftsmanship in their, comic book art or anything like that. I'm a huge fan of, a lot of that stuff. But Japanese, just on the whole, like the bar was just much higher. So it's often made me wonder, like, if I had better access to streaming, like instantly dubbed or subbed content, would I have, like, I'm an inherently lazy person. Would I have bothered to learn Japanese? I don't know.
Most people don't if they don't have to, right? Because Japanese is a really difficult language.
Yeah, it's not like, Spanish or French where you have some kind of shared roots in like Latin. It's completely different. So
I mean, it's not only the grammar is backwards, but the characters are completely different. And
yes.
They can mean different things in different contexts.
And apparently, according to the BBC's outgoing correspondent, all of Japan is backwards. So,
no, you have to explain this. We were talking about this before we got on, so please.
Oh, well, right before we recorded this, the outgoing correspondent of the BBC wrote this article like, "Oh, you're so behind the times, Japan." He's leaving Japan now to be assigned to a different area, and it's just this kind of like it's not a rage bait piece exactly, but he's just crapping on all sorts of aspects of Japanese society, many of which I agree. Like I despise Japanese politics too. Like I really hate the bureaucracy here too. But it's like, I don't know. It just came across as a kind of, I don't know, a turd in the punch bowl, I believe is what we say.
Yeah, I mean, Reddit is filled with posts like this, and I don't understand why they don't get printed by the BBC.
Well, first you have to become a journalist, and you have to become like the bureau chief of Japan, I guess. But the thing, he's not like completely off base, but it's written in this just really like, oh, here's where you're going wrong, Japan. But then I actually asked the guy on Twitter, do you speak Japanese? And it turns out he doesn't. So it's like, do you think maybe the fact that you aren't able to interact with this entire race of people in their own language may have colored your perceptions just a little bit? Would you leave some opening there for that? But forgive me, I don't want to digress into negativity.
No, it just kind of makes you wonder, like, how did this guy get this assignment?
Well, journalists tend to get like rotated through positions. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, and I'm not somebody who believes, it's obviously like there's a lot of murder mystery writers out there who have never murdered anyone. I hope, I don't. You're right. It's like, I
guess that shouldn't be a prerequisite.
Exactly. So I get it. I'm not going to dismiss somebody out of hand just because they can't speak the language of the place they're in. I mean, one of my favorite writers on Japan, Lafcadio Hearn, doesn't speak any Japanese. I think if you have a very like open mind and you are somebody who is like culturally sensitive and you don't have a chip on your shoulder, you absolutely don't need to speak Japanese to pick up like on things here. But like most people I know who are in that position aren't writing like, pieces just dumping on Japan. Like, what I mean? They're writing pieces they're loving on Japan, which is a completely different sort of thing. So.
No, Japan is such an interesting, Japan and the culture and the translation, right?
Sure.
there's always this kind of thing where people are kind of one-upping each other.
Yeah.
Like, I'm more this than you, I know more than you,
Yeah.
and then the way that I don't know, like I saw that book, like the Ikigai, the Japanese art of the blah blah
Right.
blah. Like
Yeah.
everyone hates that book.
Well, it's the Ikigai is kind of another issue because it's written by it's this book talking about how Japanese people have Ikigai is just a word that means like your raison d'etre, right? Your kind of meaning, finding your meaning for living. And but it's a book written by a bunch of foreign guys about Japan. Like they kind of parachute into Japan and they write this thing about people finding their and it's actually centered really hugely in Okinawa.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They conducted some research on an island in Okinawa where the average like people just live really long and happy and satisfied lives. It's but this is something that's actually kind of overlaps the Mediterranean. I think like a lot of island life, you get this kind of thing, and that's actually the really interesting part about it. But Ikigai has become this term in English to mean finding your meaning in life. But what isn't really ever explained in that book and what isn't understood by people at large is that the word ikigai is very neutral. Like if you are a serial killer who enjoys like binding, torturing, and killing people, that could be your ikigai. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just like whatever drives you in life. So like, yes, it's positive. We should find our ikigai, but there are good ikigai and there are bad ikigai. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not like it's a universally beautiful term or anything like that.
Because iki means iki's goal, right? And gai is way.
No. Ikigai is ikiru. It's like ikiru, living.
To live. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like your passion for living, your reason for living. Do you know what I mean? Like what motivates you to get up in the morning? But if you're a psychopath, like what motivates you to get up in the morning might not be something exactly socially acceptable. That way, your ikigai might be wanting to go out and cause mayhem. So it's not like it's yes, you should find what motivates you in life, but hopefully it should be something, I don't know, positive, something that doesn't, and that aspect is not really explored in there.
But I want to bring this back around because I think both of you are great examples of finding your ikigai.
Ikigai.
Right? You guys have found like your something that came out of nowhere, apparently.
Well, mine is docking giant robots. I'm not sure. What is Patrick's?
Patrick's, what was yours?
Salami sandwiches, maybe. I really miss those. You can't really get a decent one here in Tokyo.
You can't. There's no deli meats in this country.
Yeah. If I could write like a slam piece for the BBC decrying the lack of like submarine sandwiches, like, I'm here.
Oh, now I know what to bring for you guys for Omiyage.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure deli meats. Yeah, bring that through customs.
A big old Columbus salami.
Although, there's been a boom for Philly cheesesteaks in Tokyo recently. So I've been like, yes, like I can finally get my Philly cheesesteaks again. There's like 2 or 3 Philly cheesesteak restaurants in Tokyo alone. So it's like, please, more. Anyway, Patrick's Ikigai sandwiches.
My Ikigai sandwiches, but going back to like manga origin stories, like for me, like I grew up watching Star Blazers, Battle of the Planets, all these kind of like syndicated early anime on TV. But then, that was only part of the equation because the other side of it was all this manga that a lot of these things had roots in, and it was really Fred Schott's book, Manga,
yes.
The World of Japanese Comics, that like blew my head off. And it also contained not only like a survey of the history of manga in Japan going back, hundreds of years, but also to actually including actual excerpts of manga in English, like Rose of Versailles was in there. Phoenix, of course, and my personal favorite was Ghost Warrior.
Oh,
by Matsumoto Leiji, who had created Star Blazers, and like
and Dangard Ace,
and Dangard Ace, but it kind of had this line of kind of like melancholy and kind of like obsession with World War II that was like things that were bubbling beneath the surface in Star Blazers, which was a show I loved when I was a kid, but it kind of took it to the next level, and I became like really hooked. Really trying to pick up on where how manga could take you deeper inside the anime information field, if I may use a term. And that kind of got me digging around at Kinokuniya in San Francisco looking for stuff and eventually, working at Viz. But I remember really clearly I was going to like anime, like kind of fan gatherings, like the CFO would have like viewing parties at their houses and stuff like that. And there were always people, peddlers, I guess, selling stuff, from their collections or whatever. and someone had an untranslated copy of like Violence Jack.
Oh man.
And not the original Violence Jack, but like the second series that Go Nagai did, which was like even more crazy, and he had even more sex and violence. And that
See, Violence Jack has an ikigai. It's violence. I'm sorry, go on.
Go on. Sorry.
and well, Violence Jack is he's beyond good and evil, right? Isn't he sort of like protects the innocent and sort of like, kills the bad guys or something? I don't know. There's blood
I don't know the
page.
story of Violence Jack, actually.
I just know that it has an awesome title.
It's pretty similar to Hokuto no Ken, right? It's
Right.
Fist of the North Star, basically. There's a giant earthquake that destroys the world, and then out of it come like motorcycle gangs and this kind of like Incredible Hulk figure called Violence Jack, who's sort of,
Damn.
like, will just sort of mess people up with a big jackknife. But in the second series, there's like a bunch of like pro wrestlers, there's like boxing, like it's a more advanced version of a
Right.
Wow.
post-apocalyptic scenario.
Post-apocalyptic organized sports.
Has it been released by Viz or anybody, or is it too
Nope.
violence? Too violence?
They just barely did Devilman.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some fan translations, I think, of the original series. If anyone's doing the second series, I highly recommend it, because remember, I had the complete set, like plus 30 volumes. Me and Jason.
Violent Jack, I think the anime is out on Discotheque, but not the
the anime has been like reissued over and over and over again. And that's
as well
fun,
it should be.
Yeah, but the thing about the manga is like that really, you did not need to know any Japanese to read it, because it was so propulsive.
Yes.
I mean, you could just follow the panels and it would be like anime on the page. And like, I was already a comic book nerd. I loved Alan Moore and what he was doing with Swamp Thing and stuff like that, but it was so wordy. And like like reading comic books is like a slow, or it was back then, like a slower, like entertainment medium. It just moved slower, but like manga, just like it was like eating like a bowl of ramen, like
kinetic.
Like it very kinetic. And that was like a big draw for me, was like that energy kick you get from a good volume of manga is like, up there with caffeine and stronger substances.
That's absolutely true, because you can actually, without being able to read much Japanese, you can understand what's happening in the story.
Yeah. And actually, I think that's really different from what one of the big key differences, to my mind, between the anime in particular of times of old and now. It was just much more visually driven back then. Like there's a lot of talking heads in anime now. And like there are some kinetic anime, like Chainsaw Man, I thought was really great that way. But there's a lot of like, anime have gotten much more plot driven and talky recently, I think, over the last couple of decades, really. There's so much slice of life stuff now where it's set like in high schools and it's like kind of variations on that. And there's a lot of like interactions between kind of template style characters, like stereotypical characters that are driven more by fan expectations of what characters like that do in a given scenario than it is about the kind of the visual excitement. I don't know. I mean, I'm like Patrick, I didn't understand Japanese at all when I was first starting to encounter this stuff. And it's why, actually, you guys all mentioned it. Fred Schott's work, Manga.
Yes.
I mean, to me, like I loved Ghost Warrior, but the one that left the longest, the biggest impression on me was actually Phoenix, which is this in Fred Schott's book. There's this, it's a Osamu Tezuka story taken from Hinotori about a man who is carving a Buddhist statue, and then like he dies, and he's like born and reborn again and again in different animal bodies, and then he goes through these like cycles of life. And then like all of a sudden, like he meets the Phoenix, and the Phoenix is like, well, I'm going to send you back. And he wakes up on the floor of his studio, and it's not clear whether this was a dream, whether he had like a heart attack and like the Hinotori was kind of like his benefactor or whatever. But then he goes on to start carving the Buddha statue again. And it was so different from, not only was like content wise so different from anything I'd read, but like it was steeped in this religious tradition I knew nothing about. In suburban Maryland, there weren't a lot of Buddhists around. I'm sure there were, but like you didn't really encounter them. And so it was this kind of window into this whole other world. And, ironically, I'm not a huge Tezuka fan in general. Like I love him. I respect him, but I find stuff like, Astro Boy a little bit dated and tough to read. I like his more later Gekiga kind of stuff if I read it, like, Tori Phoenix 2772 and all that kind of stuff. But that manga without Fred, where would we be, really? I mean, Fred Schott
Oh.
was the pioneer on this. And if anybody's, I mean, it would be kind of crazy if you're listening to this podcast and you have not read manga, but, please do. It's a seminal work introducing manga to the West.
And the only tragedy is that it'll never be updated,
Yeah. It came out from Kodansha International at first. And that's the same imprint, the same, publisher that put out our Yokai Attack and Ninja Attack and Yurei Attack. Yeah, actually, I was really excited when Hiroko and I submitted the proposal for Yokai Attack to Kodansha International back in like 2007. The idea that this publisher had put out Fred's book was actually really foremost on. Wow, we're publishing through a company where Fred Schott published. But yeah, it's tough. Like he didn't have to clear permissions back then. Like nobody really cared in the early 80s. Like it was really loosey-goosey, and you could be like, and also the big difference is Fred was not going through like the production studios. He'd like call up Go Nagai. He would call up Reiji Matsumoto. He'd go hang out with him. Hey, can I use your art? Sure, man. Because Fred was at the time like Tezuka's interpreter. Like he's literally like, he's like the right-hand man of the god of manga. So of course, like he's like this apostle who like descends into these other manga artists' lives and nobody's going to say no. It was really cool that he was able to do that. It was probably something that could only happen at that one moment in history, which is like 83. Is that the year it came out?
83,
I think it was published in 83.
Yeah. I remember that because that book, prior to Fred Schott's book, I was just reading manga and not knowing what I was reading, right? Like
Sure.
I didn't know there was shoujo and shonen. I didn't know that there was legendary creators. I didn't know there was a whole thing about these phone book size, like why the phone book size magazines were the way they were.
Right.
I knew nothing. And so it was all like, I was just basically kind of dropped into this culture and I didn't know anything about it, despite being Japanese, right? Despite having all these Japanese bookstores. Like, if you don't know the context, you don't know what's going on. So having Fred's book gave me so much structure.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going through this now with Korean comics, right?
Right.
Where all of a sudden, it's this world I know very little about, right? I don't know who the legends are. I don't know how the publishing is done. I don't know the structure. So it's like, I'm back to square one.
What are they called? Manhwa? Is that
manhwa?
Manhwa?
Or webtoons.
I see. I hope somebody does, manhwa, the world of Korean comics. Seriously, I mean, I love stuff like that. Explainers, like intelligent explainers by somebody on the inside are like so valuable.
Yeah.
So if anybody's listening, please write that book.
What I remember is what happened after manga came out. Like manga in the US in translation, like went through a weird phase where they were trying to get it into the American comic book market.
Yes.
Marvel Epic Comics did Akira and they flipped it and colored it.
Yep.
Viz began doing stuff like Area 88 and My the Psychic Girl, which was just basically giving you like 22 pages of manga, which takes about like 5 minutes to read, and then charging you like full price, like, $2.99 or $3.99 or however much it was. And so it was a really weird market. Like, and then of course there's a lot of pushback from the American comic industry and the readers. Like, what is this stuff? It's black and white. What is this Akira? There's no superheroes in it.
Ironically, Akira got reverse imported back into Japan, the colorized version, because Akira was pretty popular here too, of course. I mean, Otomo Katsuhiro was like a kind of, I mean, his art was so mind-bending, he basically like redefined what manga could be in the late 70s and early 80s. But those color comics like it's called Akira USA or something like that. And I actually came into a bunch of them from a friend of mine who was like downsizing. And there are these amazing Japanese language explanations, like the translator who kind of reverse translated them back into Japanese. They did not use Otomo's original stuff. They reverse translated them from English back into Japanese. And then he writes these kind of like, introductions to Japanese readers of what American comics are. And then there's these great interviews with people involved at Marvel. So Mary Jo Duffy was the editor on those at the time. And there's this long back and forth between her and the translator of Akira back into Japanese, where she reveals all of this stuff. Like, she and a couple other people were the driving force trying to get manga in at Marvel, but Marvel's bureaucracy was just too like bloated and slow to move quickly. So they lost out on the two big titles they wanted Mazinger USA, That was the
What?
big one and that
Damn
was the
it!
first. And then Lone Wolf and Cub was the other one that she was really, really trying to get. That also went to first, I believe. And
Wow.
eventually they did Akira, which I think was probably a better fit for Marvel, truth be told. As much as I love Go Nagai, Mazinger in USA is not exactly what I'd call an exemplar of his work. It's a cool cover, but yeah, so it was really interesting seeing that kind of stuff. There's a kind of back and forth between Japan and America at that time.
That's amazing.
Grand Canyon University's RN to BSN online degree program makes earning your bachelor's in nursing possible. Balance online coursework with local in-person clinicals to position yourself for potential leadership opportunities in the time you have from wherever you are, leaving room for what matters. Achieve your goals with your personalized plan and team behind you. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Visit gcu.edu.
Wait, do we have a latecomer here? Do we have a latecomer to the podcast?
Yeah, I apparently did not read my time zones correctly. I'm so sorry. Good. It's wonderful to be joining you already in progress. Sorry about that.
Well, let us Mangasplain to you what we're doing today. No, I'm just kidding.
Perfect.
Now that you've joined us, we were talking about our manga gateway drugs, and Matt was telling us how both Patrick and I were so lucky to have so much more Japanese exposure than he was in Maryland. But maybe let's hop it over to you. What was your gateway drug?
Yeah, where were you raised, Christopher?
One of the suburbs of Toronto, Canada.
Okay.
I don't go into it too much with the Mangasplaining crew because it's pretty inside baseball, but I think you guys can handle it.
Okay. Hit us. Let's hear this.
I actually grew up. My best friend, when we were growing up, impersonated a university student using the proto-internet and got into tape trading with university students who were like basically doing the earliest fan subbing and things like that. So he would basically send blank tapes off to some other university, air quotes, university student. We were like 12 at the time. And they would send back 8-hour EP, like super slow recorded tapes just full of fan subbed anime, people using their like Commodore Amigas to like add fan subs with Video Toaster and stuff like that. And we would watch whatever we could get sent. And so I watched probably a couple 100 hours of like the entirety of anime that was available in like, what I look back on as the golden age now, and the stuff from the late 80s and the early 90s. So everything from really trash stuff to like from like Lensman and things like that.
That's not trash.
That's not trash.
Lensman is
take that
very,
back.
very bad movie.
The toys are great.
What?
The toys are pretty great. To like everything that was hot and contemporary at the time. So like Project Eiko and Ranma, and we watched a lot of Urusei Yatsura, which I did not get at the time. I'm like, why is Lum just this abusive character that keeps hurting everybody? But I didn't really realize that was part of its charm. And actually, we just talked about this the other week on the podcast. Golden Boy was one of the anime we watched, and it was just like the horniest possible thing for a group of 13-year-olds to watch.
Yeah.
So so lots and lots of fun stuff like that, basically. And then from there, it's like, oh, there's Akira comics from this Akira anime that we watched. Oh, there's Ranma comics. Oh, and sorry, and I'm pronouncing it correctly now, but with my Canadian accent, where we only have like the most nasal vowels, was there's Ranma. There's Ranma comics. I'm gonna go to the comic book store and buy some Ranma. And honestly, reading the comics and getting the occasional like trade paperback that Viz would do for $28 Canadian for 192 pages, I just loved the comics. Like, I loved the anime. We were obviously watching it and we couldn't stop, but the comics spoke to me in a very different way. They had Akira in particular, because where it was in the serialization when I was picking up random issues was so far removed from the anime. It was like, the last couple of volumes. So they had this like mystical quality, like, oh my god, if you go into the comics, there's stories that aren't part of the anime, and it's more and it's different. And it was in color as well, which was kind of blew my mind on Akira. I kind of just started devouring anything I could afford or get my hands on. But there was something about buying this is going to sound terrible, but it's why I try to be sensitive to people who resort to piracy in this day and age. But there's something weird about buying manga and anime. Like if you go to the store and you just buy it, it's not cool anymore. It has to be something that you like really dig for and try to seek out and try to you can't just get it through normal channels. You have to get the real stuff that's only available from some randos on the internet who, turned out to all be pretty nice dudes. So that's good. And the other neat thing about that was that I got a lot more of the culture that way too, because you wouldn't just get the anime. You'd get things like, here's a tape of people doing, what's it called again? When you do you cut anime to popular songs.
Oh yeah, what is that called? They do it at
anime
conventions.
music videos, AMVs.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, AMVs. So we'd get a tape of AMVs. We got the Daikon opening, which was, I got to see that when I was 12 or 13, just a couple of years after it was made. The really famous one with all the copyright infringement. We got to see Otaku no Video that way actually as well.
Oh, that's a great one.
Really great. So yeah, so I became sort of equally as fascinated by all the, not just the commercial projects, but all the stuff behind it as well.
That fandom. Yeah. Actually, I think what you're talking about there kind of bridges the generations, because manga and anime aren't really marketed like Hollywood stuff or American stuff is. You have to kind of seek it out. And in the process of seeking it out, it really becomes an identity for a lot of people, much more so, in the same way that back when I was in school or whatever, people would have to make mixtapes and find bands and oh, this guy he has a solo album, and you kind of trace the lineage of the music that you liked back, further. Same thing with anime and manga. And I think even now today that it's so much more is available and so much in real time. Even with that, it's still a kind of, there's a huge amount of stuff you have to watch and to try to contextualize and figure out. And I think that's a big part of the charm, actually, for manga and anime.
I agree with that. And actually, it's amazing that I've got you both here, because both of you sort of continued my cultural education in a way that just watching anime and manga might not have. Patrick, your book, Cruising the Anime City, was the book that I took as my guidebook to go to Japan for the first time in 2007.
I apologize.
That's a great book. No apologies. That's a great book.
I'm just being facetious.
And then Matt, I got, kind of weeby for a while there, but I was obsessed with NHK World because I didn't really
Nice to know someone was obsessed with.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is my turn to apologize.
No, so Matt being on Japanology Plus, I was just that's how I came to know who Matt was. And I was oh wait, he works in all the manga and anime that I sell at the store too.
Yeah.
I got a job at a comic book store really early. I was 16. So then all of a sudden, the mystery goes away when you start ordering SKUs and things like that. You know exactly sort of what's out there and what's available, but the culture became the mystery at that point once the manga and the anime became very solidified. So trying to find Japanese cultural information was, Viz was doing the pulp time. Viz was doing just some awesome stuff with the Tokyoscope book and with Cruising Anime City, the Fresh Pulp book, a collection of interviews and things like that, and then the magazine itself. And then discovering NHK World, or at least NHK News, and then just deep diving on that for a while, learning your Japanese from their. I actually learned all my initial Japanese from the shows that they would put on of hapless foreigners pausing and then being instructed in Japanese and then saying their Japanese back to people. I loved that stuff.
My dream is to pitch an NHK World show of Patrick and I. That's my dream.
Oh, you guys should totally do that.
We've been on a lot of shows individually. I don't think we've ever been on one together.
Yeah, where we activate our Wonder Twin powers.
Exactly.
They send us to the remote countryside, at a dairy farm or something like that.
I think NHK knows that if they put us both on at the same time, it would be too powerful for Japan.
The tragedy. Come on.
I know.
Well, I wanted to say something about Viz, since you mentioned some real deep cuts there, like Pulp and Japan Edge and stuff like that, is that when I was working there at Viz, they had Japanese subcultural people were managing the company, Seiji and Satoru. These were guys who had come to America from Japan in the 60s because they were groovy hippies. And they were kind of steeped in rock and roll and maybe some new age esoterica and stuff like that. But they really wanted to kind of share that spirit with the audience that was kind of discovering Japan through anime and manga, through things like Urusei Yatsura and the kind of more mainstreamy things. They're what if we show our audience, this incredibly weird underground Japanese subculture, like what would happen. And it didn't really reach a lot of people, but we kind of feel like it made an impact with the right people, like yourself, if that makes sense.
Oh, thank you. I look back at it and I actually got to see what the sales on all that stuff was at one point when I was working at Viz. And it was not good. And it was, I think, really just a matter of Viz being way ahead of its time on that stuff, because it was really, and those people specifically, because I know that the company management completely changed over. But you look now at the widespread obsession with like city pop and like how Japanese film went through this whole thing, and it just seemed like, yeah, the work that you guys were doing at Pulp at the time on that little weird wing of Viz, just it became a huge part of the culture. Like, and obviously the mainstream, like Yurusei Yatsura is back again now too. But I think that's really, really wild stuff. I wish that stuff was still online, because it's just so much information.
For sure. You were doing, Patrick, you guys were doing like some deep dive, like, because it wasn't just like, hey, here's what's on TV in Japan right now. Like, you guys were doing some like really deep dives, as I recall, like on stuff that wasn't really available in English at all at the time, right?
Well, we had like Toma Machiyama was writing for Pulp for a while. We had Warren Ellis. Is he count? I can't forget if he's still canceled or not, or something like that. But anyway, we had like some real wild people from Japan. There was like Shiratori. We had some people who work at like just people in the underground, in the Japanese underground. Like, we're presenting you their thoughts, their picks, their recommendations in English. And then, once a month, the accountant would show up and tell us what our sales figures were. And we'd get all depressed about it. And we'd meet our deadline and do it all over again. And it was a fun party while it lasted. And yeah, I mean, I think as much money as there is going into anime and manga nowadays, I think it's important to set aside, a little bit to sort of just kind of educate the customers and sort of not educate them in a boring academic way, but to present another side of Japanese culture that they might be interested in, to kind of use this as a gateway to other things. And that's kind of what I think we were doing, or I don't know. I don't see as much crossover now between anime, manga, and that subculture wing as there used to be, which is interesting because, like you said, some of these things are much more mainstream now than they were back then.
One of the really, I think, ironic things about the mainstreaming of anime and manga in the States now is that one of the big pulls for me, and I think a lot of people, was knowing there was always some like deeper level to go to. And stuff like Pulp was really, like that was the first place I learned about like Junji Ito and like Uzumaki and like a lot of other stuff like that.
Like people like you and maybe like Ryan Sands, for example, with his same catalog.
Right.
Like those kind of people who are truffle hunting and doing these deep cuts are
truffle hunting. I love it.
I call it that.
Yeah, no, totally. It is truffle hunting. It is. I mean, I don't know that like I don't know if modern young mainstream anime fans are into that digging in the crate stuff as much as they used to be. I honestly don't know. I don't like hang out with teenagers much, offense teenagers. I mean, do your thing. But, being almost 50, I'd be kind of a dirty old man if I did that. So I don't know really what young people are doing so much anymore. But I get the sense that now that like all of this information is kind of available at your fingertips through Google or, Wikipedia or, there's a wiki for every show where like every aspect of everything has been cataloged, like whether it's like Saint Seiya or whether it's something modern, it's out there. And I wonder if that like data used to be the currency that we trafficked in. And like the more that you knew and the more you had in your head, like the kind of a bigger of a presence you were. And now I just think, maybe you just look like an egghead if you're like, well, actually, that came from, this and that. I don't know. Maybe you guys are more into that than I am.
Well, sorry. So I came up when I came up, and Patrick and that crew, I was maybe five years younger than you guys were at the time. So I was just behind going, oh my God, these guys are writing this amazing stuff. I'm learning so much every week. But all that information now that you put together in those books that Viz did is gone. Like, unless you can track down a secondhand copy of that book, if it's not digital, it is totally missing from the discourse.
Yeah.
Totally missing from the discourse. So I see stuff on, like I do the show notes every week where we talk about stuff, and then you guys somebody will offhand mention something. I'll have to go dig up, to explain what that was. This is going to be an episode full of that, I'm sure.
Right.
But I'll go to Wikipedia, I'll be like, oh, there's stuff missing here. There's like things that we air quotes as fandom or as journalists or whatever have already figured out that is not actually in this Wikipedia, or it hasn't been found. And that's really interesting to me, that unless it's digital, it's not part of the conversation. And that's what, but you also, you can't make people read either, which is the other thing. Yeah.
Well, I kind of like
find
the idea that it's, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Like it's from the underground. It went back to the underground, like it's sort of, it's buried once again.
Right.
100 years or whatever.
But it's not really gone. Like if you look for it, it is there. So like, that stuff is there. But manga and anime are such an adolescent medium in a lot of ways that I think for most fans, like history began when they found their first manga or anime that they liked. And like anything before that's ancient history, regardless of.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I've seen
that's just inherent.
Talk about like Naruto. It's like, oh, let's talk about classic manga like Naruto. Like,
yeah, it's just brutal.
Right.
Going back to what you said about Junji Ito, it's amazing how he has like completely claimed the seinen landscape, sort of for like of that kind of work, just for himself. Like it's just Junji Ito, and everything gets compared to Junji Ito because people don't really realize that Junji Ito was a huge flop. Huge flop when they first tried to launch him with Uzumaki in pulp. Like that first trade just did very, very badly. And I know that because my name is on the book, on the back cover of the first Uzumaki trade printing.
Oh, wow.
The only person they could find for a pull quote for the back of the book was me and my blog. So,
wow.
Yikes. So, yeah. It was just reformatting it and waiting for people to sort of catch up to it. But you look at the book Secret Comics Japan, like it's got Junko Mizuno in there.
Sure.
But it's also got like Shintaro Kago in there, like 5 to 10 years before he did that Vice cover. And then suddenly became like, Shintaro Kago's the dude who makes the craziest, most obscene kind of manga. You know what I mean? So I think that and then the other people that are actually in that book are phenomenal too. Furuya pages in particular. No one's done Pelopoli, but I really do think that people do find it generationally. People talk about classic manga as anything that was like even a couple of years before I started reading manga. And there is this real focus on like the now. And it's only very few series, and we're about to get into this. We just reviewed Goodnight Punpun, Oyasumi Punpun, which is one of those series that's like from long ago and has that mythical internet quality that kind of had like that manga had when I started reading. Like, oh, have you read this Goodnight Punpun? It's kind of old, but it's really fun. You've got to read it. It's like you got to track it down. Inio Asano.
Right.
And it's like, man, that's it's not that old. It's still in print.
Sure.
Come on.
Sure. I mean, but Junji Ito is interesting because, he's just like, he inherited, like, there's a huge horror manga tradition in Japan. There's like Umezu Kazuo. I think some of his stuff has been translated. Umezu is more synonymous with horror manga in Japan than Ito is, I think. Wouldn't you say, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I remember we did Orochi, I think was the first Umezu Kazuo that we did in English.
Drifting Classroom? Did you guys do that one?
Yeah, Drifting Classroom came eventually. That was after I was gone. But we didn't know how to market it. There was really no way to get people interested. There was no social media. We couldn't just post like outrageous panels of manga on the internet. It was just a different world. You had to get someone to go to a bookstore and like buy this probably shrink-wrapped volume for like $20 and get them to engage at this very high level with something that was almost like a complete unknown.
Yeah, totally.
So, yeah, it was a tall order.
Do you know, has Morohoshi Daijiro been translated into English? Because he's another classic horror manga artist in Japan.
That's a big gap. That's a big gap. And I'm waiting for them to discover him.
His stuff directly influenced like Anno and like the way that the Evangelion, Eva units look. That kind of lanky...
Attack on Titan too, right?
What's that? Attack on Titan too, for sure. Morohoshi Daijiro does these kind of... They're steeped kind of in folklore and modern horror at the same time. Like a lot of bio-horror, body horror. Like he's not as great of a draftsman as some other mangaka, but his stories are just really amazing. And it's just... I don't know. It's just sad to me that it's great that Junji Ito is getting a lot of attention. He should. He's great. I love his stuff. But like... There's this lineage of stuff before him, and I know it's a much harder sell. Niches are just tough to sell, but I don't know. Maybe people listening to this will clamor for Morohoshi Daijiro and other horror mangaka.
But if you don't know it exists, right? And like the Fred Schaut's book to me is still the repository of all the older manga that is legendary that has never been published in English, right?
Yes.
Like the Fisherman Sanpei.
Oh, Fish Crazed Sanpei. Yes.
Or what else is the other one? Like Fire by Hideko Mizuno.
Oh, yeah. Fire isn't out, is it?
Nope.
Glass Mask, all those classic
Yeah.
titles, right? That you think that it's kind of, I tell people it's kind of like, like loving Led Zeppelin, but not knowing the blues.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's like, Poe, like the Poe clan, like that only
Mm.
recently came out, but I don't
Yeah.
really think it hit with the same impact that it did in Japan of like 1971. Like the era is different, and now
How
people
could
have,
it, right?
yeah, well, people are so used to like, homoerotic vampire stuff, and they don't realize this woman pioneered that, like way before Anne Rice did, way before any of this stuff. It just looks kind of old fashioned now, but that was the text. You know what I mean? That's the original stuff. So I don't know. I think we're kind of off topic here because now we're kind of just old people complaining that young folks don't know the roots anymore.
No, but that was the theme.
No, I mean it always is. It
Actually, that
always
was the
is,
theme
right?
of this.
So
Let's bring it back then. And I apologize. Like we said, I missed the first little bit of the conversation, but maybe that's a good question. Patrick, I feel like you're pretty plugged in right now because you're at Otaku USA still. Is that correct? Or have I put my foot in my mouth?
Yeah, every 2 months we have a new issue. Yeah. Otaku USA.
What's the thing that you think is missing from the landscape right now in terms of like manga or even pop culture that is available in Japan, or at least was available in Japan, that you don't see a lot of right now? What's the thing that you want to see?
Like those crazy Ryoichi Ikegami kind of Gekiga sort of things. These were really big back in the day at Viz, like Sanctuary, Crying Freeman. These were like big sellers. They were filled like a lot of sex and violence, but beautifully drawn. Like Ikegami to me is like a god of manga. One of the best. And he's still alive and he's still doing stuff.
Well, there's going to be there's a huge show of Ikegami's work at Uncle M this year, and I'm so sad I'm missing it because it's a huge retrospective, like the Mizuki's. It's
right.
It's probably
the Mizuki production, the Mizuki thing in France, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah,
same
that
museum.
was really good. Actually,
they're going to make a monograph and the same curator. So I'm missing the Ikegami one.
Deb gave me the Mizuki, you can't even call it a pamphlet, like the catalog for that show in France. And even though I can't read it very well, it's amazing. So good for them for doing more of that.
Patrick, that's really interesting that you went right to Ikegami, actually. Because, that kind of, for lack of a better word, manly manga.
Trash.
that like very aggressive trash doesn't really exist like in the same way anymore. And it did really dominate the landscape at the beginning of the manga and anime days.
But there are still magazines. There are still monthly magazines here who publish that kind of stuff. I'm blanking on the name of the artist who is another guy who did tons of work with Kazuo Koike back in the day. And he's still drawing stuff where it's like female ninja by night, salary woman by day,
Oh, the Lady Snowblood artist?
What's his name?
The artist who did Lady Snowblood?
No. I'll look it up. He did a series called Brothers with Kazuo Koike, which is like has like robot Hitlers and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of the stuff will get you canceled in about 5 seconds. So I understand why like foreign publishers won't touch it, but it's still a thing. Like I think a lot of these monthly magazines come packaged with like DVDs with like pachinko tips and stuff like that. Like there's an audience for like these like chain smoking old guys in front of the combini. Like this is their jam, and it's still here. The good news for me is that a lot of this stuff is on Amazon Prime here in Japan. So if you pay the fees, you can just eat this stuff up. And I have my iPad here, and I just sometimes just flip through a few pages just for laughs and see what those wacky guys have come up with this time.
You know who what I think is missing on that front, because it's sort of the same time period of like that kind of 80s, like 70s, 80s things. And maybe you two aren't as familiar with this, but Kyoko Okazaki, she's this female manga artist who was like huge in underground circles in the 80s and kind of rose to prominence in the 90s. And then unfortunately she got into a really horrific traffic accident. Like a drunk driver hit her when she was walking on the road, and she became permanently disabled. And so she dropped out of the scene around 1995. But like the stuff she did is like so like real slice of life of women in Tokyo and like young women and their lives and stuff. Her assistant was actually Moyoko Anno, Hideaki Anno's wife, who's like she kind of rose to fame recently by doing that. Like, my darling is an insane,
my useless husband,
my useless otaku husband, who happens to be like Japan's top filmmaker. So like, there's so little of that stuff. Like manga is associated like with, sex and violence and like, ninja and yokai and like monsters and stuff, which is great. Like I love it. But like, this kind of like real life stuff by real life women who are actually the age of the characters they're portraying and stuff like that. There's so little of that out now. And I'd love to see more of that.
That is an awesome point, Matt. So Kyoko Kazaki was actually one of the first people we covered on the podcast.
Oh, really?
80 episodes ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we covered Helter Skelter. And it was because the conceit of the podcast, as longtime listeners may know, is that we're trying to introduce Chip to manga and get away from like, what do you think manga is?
Right.
At least at the beginning. And then once we've sort of broken down his defenses, then let him have some candy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Kyoko Kazaki, Helter Skelter, which is like a really heavy book about like the beauty industry and about the things that young women are subjected to.
Yeah.
He loved it. He was like, oh my God, this is so raw. It's drawn crazy. And I don't know if I like it, but I love it, kind of a thing.
Right.
Vertical released them before they were an imprint of Kodansha and then sort of got subsumed into Kodansha. But they did poorly. Like they did really, really poorly in the market because people didn't want to face reality in their manga.
Yeah.
Or even like the super, but I will say, and the reason I bring it up is that they're actually finally going to do the third Kyoko Kazaki book, and River's Edge is coming out in June. And that one actually there was a movie adaptation in Japan that was like really, really good. There was like a tribute volume. When I was doing the research on that one, there was a tribute volume of like various artists who had like River's Edge changed my life, and they put together this like 300-page volume of like short manga and essays, and there's a song, and like her work really affected people. So that's a great deep cut as well.
Well, I just, there's so many architects of modern cool out there. You know what I mean? It's like, if you like Junji Ito, you should be reading Mizuki Shigeru too. Do you know what I mean? If you like, slice of life stuff with women, you should be reading Okazaki Kyoko. But it's tough. I don't even blame Vertical or anybody like that. It's tough, like, to sell things in especially niche things. You really have to build buzz, and there's a limited amount of like money you have to market stuff. So I get it, but I don't know. I guess it's more digging in the crates for people who are so inclined,
Yeah.
We're in this era too that like we're making more money with manga, like how
Right.
Pokemon manga funded Pulp. I think the current manga boom is funding some of the stuff. Like we got Cigatera by Minoru Fuyue, which is, I'll say, it's a hard read, but it's
right.
It's important read. I'm sorry, Patrick, I interrupted you.
Oh no, I was just going to jump back and say Seisaku Kano is the artist I was talking about, who's kind of similar to Ikigami, who's still alive and drawing crazy sex and violence monthly manga comics. So
we'll put all this in the show notes, by the way. If you're following along and we just dropped like 150 names in the last half hour, don't worry about it. It'll all be in the show notes. I'll go through Wikipedia links. We'll try and find some cool stuff. It'll be all good. Thank you so much for those deep cuts. I'm sure all of the manga editors and acquiring editors that are listening to the podcast right now are furiously typing those names into Google to figure out what they can get. Or at least I hope so. That would be kind of amazing. I want to go back to Ikigami actually for a second, because I think that era of manga publishing in North America is one that we probably haven't tackled, Deb, like we kind of could have. And it's because so little of that material is in print right now. And that's another thing that like, it's where the conversation gets really cloudy around piracy, because Strain, which, for example, which is like a nice short action thriller by Ikigami, it was part of the Pulp Days, would be a good book to introduce people to right now, because it's not like go read Sanctuary, which is like 14 volumes and is never going to get reprinted, or go read, Fist of the North Star. But then Fist of the North Star, which is not obviously Ikigami, but Ronson is getting reprinted right now. And it's just because it became an online meme. You're already dead. Please, somebody who's better at Japanese, jump in with the Shinderu.
Omae wa sudeni shinderu. Yes. You are already dead. Yes.
And that became a huge internet meme. And it was powerful enough as a meme to provoke Viz to reprint the manga, because they're like, yeah, someone might actually read it this time. Let's give it a shot. You know what I mean? So, and then it's apparently doing okay. They're doing the bunkos, I think, but they're doing them as like full size. So like 1.5 volumes at a time in hardcover. And it's that kind of thing. Like, do you guys see a way in all of your forecasting, wisdom to bring back these titles? Are we going to have to make a meme out of every single old manga if we want to see the books in print again?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, seriously, I mean, we live in an era where memes are culture. This is one of the big differences between zillennial, millennial culture and Gen Xers. We of course had memes in the sense of like, movie quotes and things like that, but not like kind of digital, net driven, social media driven memes. And those are really the currency of the modern era. And if you can't inject yourself or kind of ride on some of that, energy, that's the energy, that's the youth energy of today. And if you can't ride it, it's really tough to, get yourself into the discourse, especially among young people. And that's who I think it would be really cool to have reading this stuff. Like, it's tough to sell people on like My the Psychic Girl. It's like, 30-year-old manga now. Why am I reading this when I could be reading, the latest Shonen Jump thing? And I'm like, well, there's other stuff out there besides Shonen Jump. You might, I don't know, broaden your horizons. I don't know. Patrick,
I'm looking at darkhorse.com right now, and they have all 5 volumes of Ikigami and Koike's Crying Freeman for like $4.50 a pop, which I think is cheaper than a Big Mac, even in Japan.
Wow. Wait a second.
Yeah.
Is that digital or is that like...
It's digital only. I think digital only is the way to deal with these
for sure
kind of weirder niche titles, I mean, why not?
And with an iPad, it's not that bad,
They did reprint Crying Freeman a few years ago, yeah. Well, and we're going through a thing right now where like everyone's terrified that their Kindle libraries are all going to disappear because they fired everyone at Comicsology last week. But yeah, digital is just such a weird thing. Like it's so easy to archive. Like scanlations are never going away now.
Right.
Because there's like storage is so cheap, both online and offline, that those are never, ever going to go away now. But at the same time, like you want to support official releases because you might get more stuff and you might get higher quality. You will get higher quality translations and better, content. But then, will it stick around? Even I think is a really interesting thing. Like Crying Freeman, Dark Horse wasn't the original English publisher, as we both know. So if they're not the next English publisher, does that digital edition that's in your digital Dark Horse library disappear when it moves back to when when Shogakukan enters the United States directly and has their own third or fourth or whatever? It's such a weird time for that kind of thing right now. But I will say, yeah, Patrick, I had no idea that was actually digitally available. Maybe we're going to go make Chip read some Crying Freeman. That'll be pretty fun. It's not like anything else out there.
You bring up something really interesting, which is like that kind of wanting to archive stuff. Because to me, that was like a huge driving force when I was a kid in the 80s. Like if I don't buy this now, I won't ever see it again. So whether I was buying like an anthology of manga, whether in English or Japanese, whether I was buying a toy, because I was hugely into toys. I was actually more, influenced by Japanese toys than I was even manga or anime as a kid. If I didn't get this stuff, it would be gone. And now that's kind of not really I don't know that young people really have that same kind of like axe hanging over their heads. Like, yeah, it might be annoying that like their Kindle library gets wiped out. But like you said, digital stuff kind of lives forever in some form, whether it's legal or not.
But I see more than ever, like, like YouTube videos of people bragging about their manga collections and like talking about the agony of like completing a series that's hard to find. But also they always scream, and this is, maybe I'm dating myself, but they also say, where's the physicals?
Right.
Where's the physical? Where's the physical? Yeah, that manga, honestly, I can say from the inside, manga publishers hate that because we can't keep 20,000 books from the like complete history of our publishing in print at all times for, but I mean, you could, they just wouldn't be very good quality. They'd probably be like digital prints or something like that. But yeah, I think the other problem is that I would love because I have a theory, but you guys are, as I like to say, lifers in the manga pop culture anime industry.
In the jail, in the
never
ghetto.
Getting out.
You're never getting out. There's no mandarake in North America.
Well, there was.
Sure, like
they had a
there was
store in
book
Long
off
Beach,
too, but
didn't they? Yeah.
Was there book off really? Like, is there book off?
Yeah, no. Compared to what you find in Tokyo, absolutely not.
There's no critical mass of like in North America and in Europe even of that recycle culture of like, you own something and it's super precious to you, and over time, you realize, I actually can't hold on to all this stuff. So you bring it sadly and dutifully to the mandarake and like sell it off. And there was actually a really good anecdote. I can't remember what it was in, but I think it was both of you guys bringing like a childhood toy, like a giant SDF-1 or something, to the Mandarake, and you wrote up like how to sell toys at Mandarake.
I don't think that was us, but I
We
sympathize.
sold the Yamato, remember?
Maybe
the
that
Yamato.
Maybe that was
It was
us.
you, yeah.
Oh, God, I didn't even remember.
So I actually read that when I went to sell something at Mandarake for the first time. I'm like, okay, you can do this. You don't have any Japanese, here you go. So without that critical mass, though, things don't, like, it's not like things go into the Mandarake because that's where you sell the nerd stuff. Like, sometimes it might end up at Goodwill, and Goodwill might end up tossing it because they don't know what they've got on their hands. So Japan, though, like, before foreigners started coming over and buying things and taking them out of the country in the used, sort of space, things could last forever. Like, when I started going to Japan in 2007, it was already sort of at the tail end of that. But like, you could go to Super Potato, and every game that had ever been published for the Nintendo Entertainment System or the Famicom, or even some of the old stuff we didn't get, was still there. And now, especially with the weak yen, some foreigner shows up with like 10 grand, cleans out the store of all the rare stuff, and that's never coming back to Japan. So that's the part that I think is missing in North America, is that, like, in Japan, you can always find something that somebody's talking about. You can always, like, the nerd section's there. Someone's like, oh, and have you ever read the manga by any of the guys we've mentioned now? And it's like, no, but I'll go to the Mandarake closest to me, and they'll have like half of his catalog available. I'll just grab something at random. You can't do that in North America.
Or the Manga Kisa, the rental library, right?
Yeah. There's no recycle culture in North America the way that there is in Japan. No. And Matt, you were saying about manga museums.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of, there's a lot of more manga culture here. So there's the Yonezawa Manga Museum with Meiji University, which you can go see, check books out at. There's a Shoujo Manga Museum in Okutama, which is about an hour outside of Tokyo. There's a big manga museum in Takarazuka outside of Kyoto. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff here. And just today, I really wanted to see an old issue of Shonen magazine from the 1960s. And you can just find these things. I like Mandarake had it for 700 yen. That's like $5. I just picked it up and had it sent to my house. So it's like a magazine from 1965. Like, maybe you can do that in the States, with American magazines, but I don't know that they're, like you're saying, there's any repository of vintage culture in the States like there is here in Japan.
Taking this all the way back, I daily look at Mandarake online for things that I want to buy on auction or whatever. And it took me 4 years, but eventually I found it. The Making of Lensmen, the art book.
Yes.
Mine for 1,000 yen. So stuff comes up eventually. Sooner or later, things will come around again. But also, like, you don't have to go to a library or a university to find, Manga Kisa, Manga Cafe is like a huge thing. Even now, as we talk about the death of physical media and all this kind of stuff like that. This is the great, the lesson of manga is manga is everywhere in Japan, right?
Exactly. As we often say.
And you will never, ever, ever read it all. Ever.
Yeah,
no, you will not. This isn't Pokemon, kids. You can't get them all.
It's so funny. I live around the corner from like a small publisher who's physically prints like manga weeklies. I forget which. It might be Jump. It's just a small local publisher. And then, like all over the block here on like recycling day, there's at least inevitably one or two piles of manga.
Oh, so wow.
It's just like this in-out kind of like filtration pump. This side of the street, they're printing it. This side of the street, they're recycling. So, I don't know. A lot of people make a big point about how no one reads manga anymore. Everyone's on their phones. But there are enough guys in front of the company chain smoking who still need something physical to read. So,
yeah. Absolutely. And one thing we've never covered on the podcast, because there's no English translation, is those like cheap Konbini bind up versions of manga.
Oh yeah.
I love those.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Golgo 13.
They're like Tankobon, but they're published on like the crappy paper that the weeklies are published on.
And it's like they're like 800 pages. Yeah.
Yeah.
For like $3, because you got to kill time with a smoke and a beer at the Konbini or Strong Zero, I guess. That's wild. There's so much more I would have loved to have talked to you guys about, but I think we've hit maybe the end of where we should wrap this up. Deb?
I just knew this would be a fun conversation, and we wouldn't have to prod you guys too much to get great stuff. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, let's do it again.
Let's do it again, shall we?
Yes, exactly. And in the meantime, please buy my book. Buy my book. Buy Patrick's books.
Listen to our podcast. Yeah, listen to Pure Tokyoscope. Please.
Pure Tokyoscope, and read Pure Invention. You know where to find me. I'm on the internets. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. So is Patrick. You can find us wherever podcasts are found.
That's our line. But
yeah, exactly. but thanks for having us. It was a lot of fun.
No, it was super fun. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, dudes.
This has been Mangasplaining, episode number 91, Pure Tokyoscope. Thanks for listening. For our next episode, we'll be discussing the manga My Love Story by Kazune Kawahara and Aruko. Want to pick up a copy? Consider supporting your local comic book and manga specialty shop. Find one near you at comicshoplocator.com. Or check out your local library for print and digital lending options. You can also follow along with our complete reading list at mangasplaining.com and check out our newsletter and digital publishing endeavor at mangasplainingextra.com. Thanks to DADS for their musical accompaniment this episode.